Hello and welcome to Snide's Return, a tabletop roleplay podcast. My guest today has been involved with a cartel, possibly press-ganged or seduced by their grim and dark lure. As bold as a buccaneer, he takes us on a journey to discover what rolls in the deep, how to get to safe harbour, and whether we'll get our hands on some grog, sugar, tea, or rum. From landlubber to swashbuckler, my guest brings piracy to our tables that Mork would be proud of for our public and privateer games. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome game designer, TTRPG content creator, podcaster, and shipmate Luke Stratton of Limithron to the show. Luke, thank you for joining me.
Our matey, thank you for having me aboard.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, you don't have to keep the pirate accents up the whole time, but, happy to be here.
We will see how it slips in there and here and there. So, thank you for joining me. Luke, but before we get to some of the things I alluded to there in the introduction, how did you yourself get into tabletop role-playing games, please?
Oh, well, I think my very first, my first experience with TTRPGs is probably seeing them on shelves at bookstores and being like, what is this thing? Like, it seems so cool, but I want to know more about it, And the first time I actually got to play one, I was on summer vacation down in Florida. I think I was probably 12 years old, and my cousin invited me out to a game he was running. It was basically a hack of the Aliens role-playing game back in this must have been like 95 maybe. But he had he was a really, really good GM, and he had like tweaked it himself. So he invited me to his college campus where they had a room on like a Saturday, and they ran this kind of like long form Aliens campaign where everybody played a couple different Marines. And we ended up doing this like really epic mission where we're on this like planet with a Mox, which is like this a big mech suit that they would, mad scientists would put these guys inside of. And I got to be the Sarge, and I ended up like going down this hallway and like dying, but like my exploding grenade like knocked the Mox back as aliens were swarming. And you see I'm wearing an alien hat. So clearly this is a very formative memory for me. But that was the first intro. But then I didn't really touch them again for a long time. I think I ran one or two sessions of the West End game, Star Wars game, for my brother because he was playing and I was listening to him and his friends play. And I was like, no, you're doing it all wrong. Ricky, my cousin Ricky taught me how to do this. Like, let me show you how it should be done. But I was very involved with music for most of my life. Then when my brother turned 30, for my 30th birthday, he had done this really big, elaborate, The Game, like Michael Douglas, The Game thing for my birthday, which is on YouTube. You can actually look it up. It's Luke Stratton, The Game. And he like filmed the whole thing. It was this big hubbub. So for his 30th, I had to do something. So I learned, I played a little 5e just to like learn how the things worked. And then I learned the One Ring first edition, and I ran this like one shot for him and his friends that like spiraled from the game into a real life escape room, into him like learning how to joust and having this like kind of live action role playing thing that like tied into the game. It was like a whole week long thing. But then once again, it was like a one-off isolated thing. And then like, I don't know, I think maybe a year or two before COVID, I like really got into like playing. Played a little bit of 5e around town, and then I remember being somewhere on a work trip and seeing some like old Spanish forts. And I was like, man, what if I ran like a pirate campaign? That would really be cool. And then I think the rest is history. From there, I just really bit in hook, line, and sinker. And when COVID hit, that's basically all I did was role-playing games, started making content. So there's a long answer to your short question.
That's an amazing answer. It doesn't matter how long or short the question is. It's what you give, and you have given a lot by the looks of it. And we'll touch on where we can find you very shortly, but through your supportable sites and outputs and what you've created, and what I'm so glad we've been able to sort of arrange to talk about today, which is Pirate Borg. So going from the D&D 5e and the pirates and sort of building that up and building that out, when did that then turn into Pirate Borg? How did you go from I want to run this to look at what I made, and please go and look at what has been made?
Yeah, well, honestly, it was pretty a natural progression. Like I said, I was running this, I think I was in my second or third pirate campaign. I had run one in person way before COVID, and then during COVID, we were running one, and I was basically photoshopping all these battle maps so that we had all the different ships and stuff, using other people's assets just to get them into my game. And I remember thinking, like, well, you know what? I could probably make these ships myself. So I started making them myself and started a Patreon. And, my other work is concert lighting, and there's none of that in COVID. So I was, 40, 50, 60 hours a week working on this Patreon. And by the end of quarantine, it was like my job, like a real level job. But, like anything that you're doing all the time, I was kind of burnt out because I was, it was 5e. It wasn't this kind of like emergent OSR gameplay that I'm doing now. It was like a lot of prep, and I was making assets, and I'd be making assets for my campaign, but then releasing them on the Patreon. So I was like really burnt out. But the group that I was playing with, they were all GMs. And I was like, hey guys, can we like just take a break for a little bit? And maybe I don't need a break time wise. I just need a break mentally. So we all alternated running different systems. And my friend Kevin is like, hey, I got this Swedish death metal RPG Borg that you guys like. Can I run it for you guys? And like, I was aware of Borg, and I think I maybe had the PDF or had at least seen it, but I wasn't like, at that time, and Morkborg in my mind was just the like first half of the book. It was like this crazy thing, and I hadn't really like paid attention to the second half where they really get into like layout on a whole new level, and like, hey, we've removed some of the fluff that you would get in a normal modern RPG to give you just what you really need to. So Kevin ran us through, I think, 3 sessions of Morkborg, on which my character did not die. He was like, I described him as like Jafar's character in Aladdin when he's pretending to be the old man in the jail. And like, my friend was an occult herb master, Scott, and like we were like basically like Rick and Morty, but medieval. And we like survived these guys. I mean, we just had like so much fun. We had the most fun I'd have playing RPGs probably since that game of Alien in 95. And like there was no prep, because it's like it's all, you don't know what the players are gonna do. And then I looked into it, and they had this third-party license that's like the best third-party license in the industry. Like you can make anything for the game. You can basically like hack any of the mechanics. You just can't use their like art, and they don't want you making copies.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, I could probably hack this for pirates. Like the vibe of this game would fit a pirate setting so much better than 5e. Because like while I like 5e mechanically, like I had been spending hours like, okay, here's the revised spell list to make it piratey, and we're gonna level cap at 6, and you can't long rest at sea, and like all these like little tweaks to the system where it was like, why are we even playing 5th edition? We should be playing something different.
Yeah.
So I started, and I was running the Patreon, and the Patreon, I was like, I could probably hack this and release it to my patrons and kickstart like a little zine. And yeah, that could be cool. And so I started doing the hack, and then I actually ran it for a group of friends of mine. And I remember being like really bothered by my Patreon art style not matching the like bright yellow and neon punk style of Morkborg. So I'd be like looking at these like yellow weapons tables I'd made for Pirate Borg, and then like looking at my like, parchment old Age of Sail battle maps. I'm like, this just it's not really vibing for me. So I kind of I went back to like not a page 1 rewrite, but like a page 1 re-theme, and did more of a like kind of darkest dungeon pirate approach. And then by the time I was done, it went from being like, this will be a cool, fun side project I can release to my patrons, to like, this is actually, I'm really proud of this. And I think this is actually like the best way to play a pirate game. So then I kickstarted it, and like I have enough experience in marketing, and I've worked with bands long enough to know like you don't just turn it on and hope. So we did marketing, and I reached out for media coverage, and we did enough of that my day one, like where I at was day one, at the end of day one, was better than I had hoped the whole campaign would do.
Wow, amazing.
And like, as you can probably imagine, that experience for any Kickstarter is life changing, as it was for me. So I went from, instead of having this like cool little side Patreon project, to like a whole new like ecosystem to run pirate games in. So the Kickstarter went like amazingly well. And then at the con season that year, I kind of like finished the deal with getting Free League to actually publish it through their Free League Workshop, like sub label, if you will. So it's actually published the same way that Morkborg is, which makes it the only non-cartel game to get that, which I don't really understand. Like, that's really a very pinch me thing. Like, I can't believe that that's happening, really. So,
I mean, to be fair, and we'll dig into the game itself very shortly, but to be just looking at it and just going through it for the review copy that Philly did send to me. Bowl is an amazing PR person, by the way.
Hi, Bowl. Yeah.
It absolutely nails everything. And again, I implore people, and we'll get the links in just a moment, to follow the links and go and pick this up because it looks amazing. So
Thank you.
On that tenuous sort of link, Luke, where can we go and find you and support you on social media and the internet
Sure,
at its widest?
Well, the best way for me, if people often ask that, what's the best way for the creators, is to join our Patreon. Patreon's an incredible platform. I'm actually a Patreon ambassador now. It is a program that lets creative people make things without the worry of how they're going to sell it. And I feel like that's a really important thing for art when you're making thing that even if it just approaches being art, that or any creative endeavor, that you're making it because you want to make it and not worrying about what's going to sell. And like with Pirate Borg, like that really, like it wouldn't exist without Patreon, because I couldn't have taken the time out of my like life that I use to pay my bills to make a creative project if I didn't have a group of people like helping me do that. So now that the book is out, the Patreon is where like everything that we make for Pirate Borg, all like I think I'm working on the fourth like adventure or module for it. They all go to Patreon first. If they're smaller, they come out as a single release, and then bigger projects like my next book, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, The Dark Caribbean, will get released in chunks on the Patreon. So people can like participate in that process, but also I can like have the liberty to be like, this is what I want to do, and I don't want to worry about selling it before I do it. I want to be a creative and do it. And Patreon lets me do that, which is a really incredible platform that you don't think about before you make one. You don't realize like, oh, I basically have VC funding for whatever I want to do, as long as it is what people want after I make it. You don't have to worry about marketing. Like with Kickstarter, you have to worry about all the marketing before you go make it. So that's the Patreon. The book is in pre-order. It's in pre-order through Limithron's website, which takes you to our backer kit page, and that'll last up till the full public release, which is Talk Like a Pirate Day, September 19th. You can also pre-order it through Free League, and on the 19th, it'll be out everywhere in retail, and you'll also be able to get it on our new web store, which is launching on Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Nice. Well, I will make sure there are links down in the description below. So please follow those links. You can also be found on Twitter and Instagram, Threads now as well. I've tried to track you down.
I just joined Threads yesterday. I guess I'm kind of out of the loop. My wife was like, "Yeah, so what do you think about Threads?" And I'm like, "What?" I mean, I saw that like weird icon, the weird @ symbol, but yeah, I'm on Threads. We'll see how it goes.
Yes. We will see how.
I started a Pirate Borg Twitter at the beginning of the year, but I don't think I have the bandwidth to give it the energy it needs to grow. So I think I'll probably just stick with the Limithron ones. We'll see.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I will make sure there are links down in the description. If you do want to carry on and support Luke, you can join one of over 2,300 Patreon subscribers that support his work and allow the releases of things that we have mentioned already and future releases that were hinted at there. So moving away from what it's been like to create it, and we can sort of touch on that more, going into the game itself, it's sort of structured around Morkborg, but is very much its own entity and its own environment, ecosystem, as you said. So looking on your website, you heavily inspired by pirates. The book also explains that in a sidebar.
Yes.
But what was it like to bring all of that inspiration, all of that childhood joy, mystery, intrigue, pirates, and sort of bring it into this OSR role-playing game for us all to enjoy at our tables?
Sure. Well, I want to start by saying that I feel like the fact that I get to do what you just described for a living is really an anomaly. I can't stress how much I am thankful for this opportunity to like make these things that I sit around daydreaming about all the time and like share them with the world. That's very, very exciting. So I think like the very short elevator pitch for Pirate Borg for people who don't know what it is that it's an OSR role playing game that it's thematically Darkest Dungeon meets Sea of Thieves. If you, you know, you have to know what all three of those things are to fully understand that. But basically, it's a rules light role playing game. I mean, Morkborg, like the rules themselves fit basically on one page. It's an OSR hack of basically BX. With a few minor changes. Magic is taken out and turned into scrolls. Armor isn't an AC. It's just a damage roll soak. And the biggest change probably is that all the rolls are player facing, meaning that the DM doesn't roll to attack. The players are rolling to defend. But other than that, it's a BX clone. I mean, it's got less stats for monsters. There's less rules. But if you know how to play BX D&D or you know how to play 5th edition D&D, you will understand Morkborg and Pirate Borg like immediately. You roll 3d6 down the line for your stats. That gives you a modifier from -3 to +3. You're usually trying to get a 12 on a d20. So yeah, I mean, you know, the curve looks a little bit different. If you're playing 5e, you might like, oh, I'm used to getting a 15, but I have a +6. Well, this is you're looking for a 12, and you have a +1 or a +2 or a -2. You know, but then the thing that really makes it great for pirate games is that Morkborg has this like they call it getting better. Is it? Yeah, getting better. And you can actually like it's like the gaining experience thing, but you can actually get worse in the process. You roll against your stats and they can go down. And I feel like that's so perfect for a pirate game. Like, oh, you've got a really bad injury or you lost an eye or whatever the experience that happened, like you don't actually get, you know, like the higher your stats go, the more likely they are to fall. Like maybe you're getting older, you know. And then, you know, from there, from the core of it, I tweaked the magic because scrolls don't make that much sense in a classic pirate setting. So I kind of split them into two categories. The lower level spells are now in items called arcane relics, or yeah, relics. And these are very like Indiana Jones, you know, items that you find in temples or whatever, and they're imbued with magic, and you can use them without having to roll to see if you pass. So they basically just work. Yeah. And then you'll do a check after the fact to see if they stun you because they're too powerful, or you actually break the relic. But you can give them to martial classes and they can still use them. Then the higher spells are now called arcane rituals. It's ancient relics, excuse me, and arcane rituals. And rituals are the like really high level dangerous magic. And a big difference between arcane rituals and Pirate Borg and scrolls and Morkborg is that you have to roll to cast rituals. And if you fail to check at all, you roll on a disaster table. But you know, there are things in the book listed that you can do to modify that. Like you can spend blood, you can work with another caster, you can take longer. Also, the check goes up if you're under duress, those kinds of things. But so they really are more designed to be like rituals. Like you might see a shaman or a Lovecraftian sorcerer or maybe a voodoo priestess doing in a circle. But you know, when you fail on them, I mean, it's like you can age 50 years or like all of a sudden the weather changes and you don't know what happened, but really you've moved forward in time without you and everybody around you've moved forward in time. You didn't know it. Really like wacky things like that. And I think I've really kind of embraced those at the table and really pushing players like, yeah, go for it. Let it fail. Because, you know, when you're not so worried about your precious little character, like the stories that come from like cataclysmic rolls on this magical mishaps table are pretty fun.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And with the pirates, so if someone says pirates, there are obviously high profile IPs that it comes with its own sort of internal understanding of how everyone generally pitches pirates. So what was it like putting your spin, your twist on not only pirates themselves as people, but the threats they face and the environment in which we sail as a crew in that
Sure,
respect.
sure. Actually, and that it ties into the other part of your question that I didn't really get to is the Sea of Thieves and the Darkest Dungeon part of it. I mean, I
Mm.
think I know. I said it like you mentioned on my website. Like I've always loved pirates. I don't. I love them as a trope. I mean, I also love them historically. I love reading about them, but like I really love the trope. Like I love the um, the pirates are the good guys even when they're doing bad things, and the British and the Spanish are the evil enemies.
Mm.
Um, but Darkest Dungeon has this worldview twist that I'm like obsessed with. It's like the aesthetic is kind of cute. It's kind of comfortable in a way. Like if you ever played Darkest Dungeon, it's like the art style is like you're not playing Dark Souls or you're not like reading Are You Afraid in the Dark? Like it's like it's comfortable to be at, but then terrible things happen to your players all the time. And you're kind of
Mm.
doing this like, okay, well, that guy died, and now I'm onto this guy, and now I'm building this guy up, and then like, oh crap, like I thought I was just going through the woods, but like this crazy eldritch creature came out, and now we're all, so like that like as much as I love the pirate fantasy, swashbuckler, they never get hurt vibe of piracy. I also love the Lovecraftian, like everybody is doomed, and it's just a matter of like, what's your story before you die? You're merely a speck in this
Mm.
cosmic universe. So I love smashing those two together. Um, so I mean, that's what Pirate Borg is. Like your character is pretty squishy, not quite as squishy as Morkborg, but way squishier than say fifth edition, especially at the first level, as we call it. And it's like Sea of Thieves in that you're exploring this beautiful, vibrant world on a ship where you can go anywhere you want. But then it's like Darkest Dungeon in that, like, oh, well, we went anywhere we want, and we ran into a cult on this island that's like summoning a
Mm.
great old one, and we can't stop it. Like, in fact, we just got to get out of here alive. Oh, we didn't all get out of here alive. Now we're all dead and ghost pirates. Like you can play that with as written material in Pirate
Mm.
Borg. We actually have a class called the Haunted Soul that is up. You can roll on that table if you want. When your characters, if they die or they TPK, you can say like, okay, you can come back as a zombie or a skeleton. And those are things that they're really hard to do in a big, thick role playing game with power balance, because like, how do you make a skeleton? How is there one skeleton? Like, how do its mechanics work with other players? Like, they want it to be balanced, but like Morkborg, they're like, look, man, there's no balance. Like, there's no hit dice, there's no CR. Like, if the monster is killing everybody, they should run away or die. And like that, I just think for my vision of what I want in a pirate game, that is perfect.
Yeah, and you mentioned there the sort of the swing of living to the unliving in many respects, and you the book brings forward so many amazing uses of the undead and the eldritch that it must have been so fun to sort of generate crews and uh, mechanics like Ash, for example,
Yeah.
or the sort of the eldritch horrors that can sort of rise from the deep and things like that. So, what have been some of the most exciting things for you to develop as this whole project? I'm sure has been exciting for you, but could you nail a few down that you were like,
Well,
I've
I think the Ash thing is really clutch. I mean, so just a little bit of background here. Like my 5e campaign was called Tales from the Caribbean. Um, and it was, it's basically Pirates of the Caribbean. Like it's, there with D&D monsters. There's probably more D&D-esque monsters in that campaign than there are in Pirate Borg. But you also things like in D&D, like a cleric can always turn undead, and then so if you have a whole campaign of undead, like that kind of stuff gets, and there's always that creep too of like what's dangerous at first level isn't at 10th level, and I hate that. Like I always want skeletons on a ship to be dangerous. Um, so when it came to making the Dark Caribbean, which is this kind of darker alternate history version of the Caribbean, I knew that I wanted it to be a desolate place that looks like almost like Midsummer, where if you've ever seen that movie, where it's like
yes.
very pretty but
Mm.
horrifying, but you don't realize it at first.
Mm.
So like if you're running a campaign and you want to be lighthearted and your players want to bounce around from island to island and fight pirates and like rob the Spanish and escape from the British. You can totally do that in Pirate Borg, but as time advances, like you can unveil this like darker element of the world, the apocalyptic world ending, and the undead creeping out of the Caribbean. So the pitch for the Dark Caribbean is this: it's 1715 on Earth, but it's not our Earth. And when the Europeans arrived in the Caribbean, there were no natives. There were just these massive temples filled with treasure. And it was like paradise, and they didn't think twice about migrating. So rather than getting like the kind of small exploratory opportunistic explorers that we have in our history, the Dark Caribbean gets like a mass exodus. You get these giant metropolises of like Nassau is huge. Havana is like a towering city, and Maracaibo becomes this like giant epicenter for the Inquisition. And like this is like I really like leaning into all the history tropes. Like conquistadors is in a time before piracy, but I've extended them into this time zone because it's an alternate history. And on top of that, I think the real linchpin for this setting is that magic is real and powerful and deadly. And this really comes from inspiration from On Stranger Tides, which is like my favorite novel of all time. Actually supplanted Lord of the Rings, which is incredible. Basically, in this book, it's an alternate history, kind of like this. And Blackbeard is a voodoo sorcerer, and there's these like British like um, academics who have discovered magic, and like the catalyst for this magic is that like it doesn't work in Europe because there's too much iron and cold metal, and in the wild Caribbean there isn't that. So that's kind of the same vibe here in the Dark Caribbean. But then the trick is, after these huge metropolis cities have been built, that the undead that have assumably destroyed all the other natives before come out of the water. Like they've been dormant for however long, and then they just wreak havoc and kill everybody. And then you would think like, oh, why don't the Europeans just leave this terrible part of the world? Well, this is the real like fun catalyst for the whole thing is ash. So when you kill these undead creatures, they leave behind an ectoplasmic dust called ash, which when our convention pitch is always like at the booth at the conventions, is it's like spice from Dune. People seem to usually get that, but it's like that kind of vibe. It's like spice mixed with like psychedelics mixed with like like if you're playing with a group of people who like to go carousing and like their pirates to get drunk, they're gonna love ash, because basically it's like, oh, giant ghost ship full of skeleton pirates, like we should run from that, we're probably all gonna die, but we're gonna go because that stuff is valuable. So you get this like new status quo where the Dark Caribbean has like, instead of an exodus back to Europe, they bolster down these cities and build walled in cities. And this trade comes of like, okay, can we get the treasure out of here, and can we fight off undead and sell their ash or consume their ash? And that just I think it just breeds a world so ripe for role-playing games, because then you've got these temples, you don't know why they're abandoned, and then now you've got derelict ships of like, oh, here, this is a ship full of gold coming from the Yucatan, heading past the Bahamas, but now it's just empty. Well, why? Well, ghosts killed it, but basically it's a floating dungeon for the players to explore. And like, I think the ash is actually like almost like a, not an afterthought, but I really was like, well, why do they stay here? And I was like, well, maybe like it's got to be some reason. And then like I came up with this, like I don't even remember, like in an afternoon maybe. And I think it's really like the thing that ties it all together. Like it really is the thing that like there's a table in the book that you roll on when you consume it. Like it's a motivator for missions. Like it can make you level up or die, like 5% chance of both. Like it's a kind of table that you would not see. I didn't see prior to Morkborg style games, where you're like, anything can happen right now and you aren't in control of that, and neither is the GM. So yeah,
that's amazing. And you mentioned a few of the locales in and around the Dark Caribbean. That is the established setting. And you mentioned earlier that there's a book now coming that's dedicated to that. So does that sort of flesh out and give us new content, or how does this new book sort of tie into the core role-playing experience that
Sure.
Pirate Book gives us?
Well, honestly, this thing started, this whole thing, like the departure from 5e thing, really started with Neverland 5e by Andrew Kolb. I got this book at Amazon, or not Amazon, in Barnes and Noble. Like I found it like in the wild, as they say. And I was like, what is like this is it says 5e compatible, but like it's kind of an OSR book in that he doesn't provide stats for monsters. It just says like this monster saves are -1, +1, and +3. And then you're just supposed to like you pick which one you think applies for the situation. Um, and that book is incredible. And in the reference or in the like acknowledgments of it, it mentions another book called The Dark of Hot Springs Island. And so I was like, what is this book? I never heard of this. And I picked that book up as well. And those two books combined are like the best setting books I've ever seen. And that they are world building in a lot of ways through tables rather than saying like this is what will happen and then this will happen, this will happen. Like Dark of Hot Springs Island has a what's happening table that's a 3d6 table, which means it has a bell curve. And like normally when you come to this location, the steam imps are like lounging around, but if you roll, if the GM rolls an 18, it could be like, oh, there's a catastrophic war and the fire imps are attacking the steam imps. It's like, so like I said, emerging gameplay and world building through tables. So my original plan, before I started Pirate Borg, was to make my own version of this kind of book where it's like, both of them have a lot of hexes, and rather than saying there'll be a brief description of what happens in the hex, but then really like often there'll be tables to figure out what's happening now. And I was like, man, I want this book. Like if I walked into this store and next to the green Neverland book was a red like dark Caribbean book or a Caribbean book that had like, oh, it's got Blackbeard, but he's a necromancer. And it's got Ponce de Leon, but he's a lich because he drank from the fountain of youth. Like, and it like that kind of thing. I just want that to exist. And at the time, I just wished I could find it. And I couldn't find it, obviously, because it doesn't exist. So I started making it. And so I was going to, in the process of writing it, I was like, that's when I discovered Morkborg. And I was going to do two versions, a 5e version and a Morkborg version, both of them called the Dark Caribbean. And I just got far enough along where I was like, oh, the Morkborg one needs classes. Okay, well, now I'm going to call it Pirate Borg. Well, now I'm going to take out the setting so anybody who wants to play pirate games in a Morkborg setting can use it. Well, now I don't like the yellow, so I'm going to add back in my color. Well, now it needs some lore like Morkborg has, but for my setting, so I added like 10 pages of Dark Caribbean lore, right? Well, so now that book blew up on its own thing, and I didn't do a ton of setting other than setting through tables.
Yeah.
There's just this few, like there's 2 paragraphs on what the British are doing. Well, the Dark Caribbean is going to be the book I've been always wanted to make, even before I found out about Morkborg. I think it's going to probably end up around 200, 300 pages. Wow. It's going to be a lot of art and a lot of maps. My idea is that it's an at the table use book. So like if you turn to the we'll use New Providence as an example. If you turn to the New Providence Island spread, there's a 2-page spread of the island map that you can show your players. And then you turn the page and then it shows like a little hex map and what's in all the hexes and random tables. Then the next page is here's Nassau, Nassau town, and a 2-page map to show your players. No spoilers, no hints of what's going on there. Turn the page, then here are plot hooks for this place. Here's what's happening table. Here are the NPCs that hang out here. And then basically from there, after you cover every island, which I have sketches, word sketches for every island, then you add in factions and you add in legendary crew and their like legendary ships and their crew, and then you add the NPCs, and then we're going to do a section that's going to be like this is kind of like for a Forbidden Lands thing, if you're familiar, where they're going to be like adventure sites that they're like, this is an adventure site that's important, but I'm not, as the designer, I'm not going to tell you where it is. You can put it wherever you want. And especially like underwater type things will be like that, or like floating, like wild islands. Like, oh, here's a, undead fort on a little island. You can put this wherever you want. Cause if your players don't go to that really cool spot in the middle of Cuba, they aren't going to find that cool thing. Like, I don't want to make a game like that. I want everyone's Dark Caribbean to be different, but then also have like threads that tie together so they can, share their experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I love one. I've started really falling for that sort of Forbidden Lands, sort of hex crawling,
Yeah.
almost randomly generated experiences. Forbidden Lands is a great game in its own right, but your adaptation of those mechanics is amazing. The fact that you're going to have those sort of 2-page spreads for players to see a map, I think is brilliant, and earmarked in my mind for someone to pick up in the future.
Yeah. I
Because
mean, part of it too is that, like, obviously I'm a map maker first. That's how I got started. But like, I'm a visual person. And like, I don't read as much as I want to read. Like, I'll admit I haven't read all of Hot Springs Island because I can only read so many pages at a time before my ADD brain starts wandering. But like Morkborg, like, I can absorb the whole thing like immediately. And as a gamer and a GM, like, I feel like the visual experience is like almost more important to me than the lore. Like, here's a great example. Before I got into this pirate campaign, I was obviously doing a lot of Lord of the Rings. And I played a lot of the Lord of the Rings living card game. And in preparation for my One Ring campaigns and then later Adventures in Middle Earth, which is the 5th edition adaptation, I went through the entire catalog of the Lord of the Rings card game and made like POG VTT tokens from every piece of art and sorted them into every category. And like, the amount of time I spent doing that, I could have been reading the adventures that they wrote. But like, I don't really want to read the published adventures because it's Tolkien stuff, and I want to make my own. I'm a very make my own kind of GM. So like, that visual experience of like looking at the art and then like making a nice background for the players to see, like, that's enough for me to get a night of gaming. I don't need like 300 pages of text. So with the Dark Caribbean and like everything that I make, with the Dark Caribbean and everything that I make, a table that you can roll on and nice visuals, including maps. So you're here. Where do you want to go? That's all you need, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I've very much sort of moved into a similar vein of gameplay and sort of. While I do personally enjoy some mechanically heavy games, I have massively swung in favor of the OSRs like Pirate Borg, Mortborg.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with mechanically heavy. I just
Yeah,
like, that's not like my brother, for example, loves mechanic heavy. Like, he is a min maxer. He's a rules lawyer, especially before I got him into the OSR. Like, mechanics are fun. Like, board game mechanics, they're fun. But I just have found, and when I'm playing role-playing games and the GM doesn't let me do something because of a rule, like, I'm rule of cool all the time. Number one rule, always. So I try to design games that play along with that.
absolutely. And going in the design vein, with respect to, so we've mentioned about sort of the locales and what's coming next for the Dark Caribbean and things like that. But mechanically now, having a bit of a scratch beneath the surface, you've got classes and archetypes and things like that in the book. So briefly explain, if no one sort of had the pleasure of playing one of these styles of games before, briefly how they work, and then if you wouldn't mind throwing at the end your favorites.
Oh, well, yeah. So in Morkborg, I think there are 6 classes. So for Pirate Borg, like, I originally started by like kind of retooling those, like, oh, what are these archetypes that I need to explore? And I recommend this approach for anybody new to making anything. I say this all the time on every podcast I'm on. Like, I steal like a pirate, you know. But the result is that really what I'm stealing is knowledge, and I'm learning from the knowledge, and then I learn how to adapt it for my own thing. And by the end, it's nowhere close to what it was originally. In fact, with like the Pirate Board classes, I ended up looking more towards classic D&D just to see like, well, what kind of archetypes, are appropriate for a role-playing game, and how do those adapt to a pirate setting? So there are 6 core classes in Pirate Borg. There's the Brute, which is basically a barbarian. There's the Rapscallion, which is basically a rogue or a thief. The Swashbuckler is like a fighter, and that they could be, it's like your standard Jack Sparrow. They could be a gun fighter or they could be a sword fighter. Then you have the Zealot, which is a kind of cleric-y, it could be a religious type figure, or it could be more of a cult type figure, but they have access to prayers. There's a sorcerer, which is kind of a necromancer inspired spellcaster. which was originally called Bokor, but we made I think a very clutch decision to kind of move away from the kind of religious cultural appropriation angle and open up at the same time open up the class to people who wanted to be like, oh, I want to be a nature sorcerer, or I want to be a Lovecraftian sorcerer, and rather than just saying it's all voodoo based, so to speak. And then the last one is the Buccaneer, which Buccaneer gets thrown around in modern terms as kind of a catch-all for pirates. But back in the day, it originates from these kind of French pirates that would cook meats over these boucan fires. And they were really good shots, and they were often privateers that were sanctioned by England, not just, pirates. So the Buccaneer class is this starts with a flintlock rifle. And one of the starting abilities could be starting with the Boucan meats, which is basically almost carrying around a healing potion. So those are the 6 core, which I thought were you get all the main archetypes for a normal RPG, but they're adapted to a pirate setting. The Buccaneer is kind of a ranger, but way better than a 5e ranger if you're familiar with the history of that. And you kind of get the BX vibe from it with the few extras like the barbarian, but it just makes sense for a pirate game, And then of course we needed to take it a step further, and so I added the 2 optional classes: Haunted Soul, which I mentioned earlier, where you can be a ghost or a skeleton or be infected by vampirism, and then the 8th one is called Tall Tale, and this is the really wacky one, which is maybe don't include it if you want your game to be more historical, but if you want to play as a mermaid or a deep one, or there's even an option to play as a crocodile or a monkey or a parrot, or my favorite is the fowl, which is a cursed chicken. And it basically starts with a random relic and a random ritual every day, and if it dies, very Zelda, this is a nod to every Zelda game ever, if it dies and whatever killed it gets swarmed by 1,000 ghost chickens. So
nice.
I think that one's really my favorite, specifically the fowl. If I had to pick a favorite, I mean, of course I'm a big fan of the sorcerer. I think that Gandalf and Yoda are my 2 biggest inspirations in life. But I don't really need to play a sorcerer in Pirate Brook. I think I want to play the fowl. Voodoo Chicken, man. It's I was running this one shot and they ran into this, necromancer captain in a shipwreck, and he killed, one of the captain player. And I was like, okay, you come back as, I wanted to try this class out. And it's you come back as a fowl. And they made him captain, and he sat on the wheel. And it's just this is often my pitch too for people who are well, my group plays 5e. And I'll be like, can you play as a monkey or a chicken or a lizard? Come on. It's just a really fun way to make new memories with your friends.
Absolutely. So making new memories, we get this crew together, however this ensemble is formed, and we set sail out into the dark Caribbean, port to port. The game you've created also supports ship combat and travel. So what has it been like incorporating that side of the pirate genre or the seafaring genre into the OSR game you've created?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said multiple times, I have a long history of pirates in my life and pirate games in my life. And I think in 03, 04 era, I was playing a lot of Pirates of the Spanish Main, which is this WizKids punch out. They called it a constructible strategy game. It's basically a miniatures game, but you could buy it at CVS, and you'd punch out these little plastic ships. But the lore in that game was incredible, and it's had a big impact on me. The way they did pirates at first, and then the cursed faction, which was kind of the undead faction. They just did a great job. They had a really specific art style that was great. But the mechanics for that game, we always called it a beer and pretzel game, and that it's very fast to table, and it's very rules light, and there's no win rules, and you basically use, the ships come in these cards. So they label one side as long and one side as short. And some ships will have SS for short movement. And you just use the card to measure. I was that's really simple and elegant, And then before COVID, Firelock Games made this game called Oak and Iron. And Firelock, they're known for Blood and Plunder, which is a historical miniatures war game based on the Age of Sail pirates. And they kickstarted this game, but it basically shipped during quarantine. Like I got my box like the first week of quarantine, or like right before, so nobody could play it. And we've been waiting for this game to come out, and it was like so everyone was like, oh man, like what a bummer way. And I think it really actually affected the company, because I think if they had been in game stores, they could have rolled with it more, and they have more stuff coming out, but it took a long time to get it rolling because of that. Well, so what they did instead at the beginning of COVID, they had a online tabletop simulator campaign, and I played. And in that game there's factions, but they're not like the wretched. They're like Spanish, Dutch, English, and pirates. And of course I was on the pirate faction, and I was the one guy that went in and tweaked all my tabletop simulator models to be ghost ships and added little flags to them. And I went, because I had started doing the Patreon, so I was like super into this. But that game is really great mechanically. And Sea of Thieves, another big inspiration, and Sid Meier's Pirates, like all these games, like they all Assassin's Creed Black Flag, they all have naval combat in them, gamified. It's not like there's this pretty popular kind of simulator style game called Naval Action, and that was not an influence for me. Like, I don't need it to be historically accurate. I want it to be historically, just like the Dark Caribbean, I want it to be historically inspired, but like some of those naval combats would last 2 days, and like I want it to last like a couple rounds.
Yeah.
So I took all those influences, the video games, and especially Pirates of the Spanish Main and Oak and Iron, and kind of pulled out the parts that I liked and then tweaked them to work for a role-playing game. And this is what became Limithron's Guide to Naval Combat. Which, like, if I had a claim to fame, I wouldn't call it that, but if I had a claim to fame before Pirate Borg, it was this system that I wrote. It's in a booklet now that we're shipping in September, but it's like maybe 20 pages. And it basically uses the monster manual to convert monster type stats into ships. And then gives very, very basic rules for how to move them around on a hex grid, so you don't have to worry about angles. And if you want to play with wind, you just say, well, from these two sides of the hex, the speed is cut in half, and from this side, it's cut to 0. That's it. And then the big difference between all these, computer and video games where it's just a single player, or war games where you're really worried about balance and whatnot, is that on these ships, the captain gets action points based on the size of the ship, and then those points get assigned to functions on the ship that the ship can do on its turn. And then the other big thing is that you have to roll initiative every turn, because you don't really know what's going to happen. So it's kind of like some of these war games where you like have to say where you're moving first, and then you get a chance to take actions. It's kind of like that. Okay. So this system is like I think pretty well. I mean, I won't even I'll boast about it. People say it's like the best 5e naval combat rule system, and like I obviously agree because I made it, but like I think if it is that, it's because it does a good job of giving all of your players something to do every turn. And the captain who's like in charge only makes decisions. They don't actually get to move it. They don't actually get to like do all these things that are often boring when you're playing a war game as a role-playing game, which is what we had to do before, So it's a long-winded way of saying like that system went really well for 5e. So when I made Pirate Borg, I was like, I'm just going to take Limithron's Guide to Naval Combat and Mork Borgify it, OSR it. So we got rid of the action points. Basically, the captain just moves the ship, and then every turn, all the players can do something. Sometimes that might just be going faster, depending on how many cannons the ship has. But it basically gives like a PC ship is more powerful than an NPC ship, as it should be. But it's a quick to table, fairly easy to learn way that's crunchy enough to give your strategic players like something fun to think about, but not so crunchy that it's going to take your whole session. And it's scalable so that if you end up getting a pirate fleet, every captain can have their own little ship, or if they have 2 ships, that it'll still work. It's not, when you see it in a role-playing game, it'll be like written from the player viewpoint, which doesn't zoom out, and this system is designed to do both. You can have all your players on one ship, or you can zoom out until like, okay, you guys have teamed up with Blackbeard and the Brethren, and you're going to attack Port Royal. you have 5 ships and they have 10. Like you could spend an evening doing that if you want.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Just sort of flicking through at how cleanly it's beautifully illustrated, of course, but how
Oh, thank you. I
cleanly
will say that
it
some
comes
of
across.
the illustrations for the naval combat part are public domain. That's kind of what we've done with naval combat, with the Limithron's Guide to Naval Combat. Just that like the big full spread. I don't quite have the Renaissance, not post Renaissance style skill to paint ships in that detail. Or if I do, I don't have the time.
Actually, the compliment was going to the sort of the pencil sort
of the actual ships. Oh
style
yeah,
of the
I
ships
did draw all
themselves.
those. Oh, thank you, thank
Um,
you. I'm
yeah,
really important for me to not take credit, to give credit where credit is due. So
absolutely, yeah. Which is fair enough. And again, it's disclaimed at the front of the book for everybody
yeah,
to.
yes.
Uh,
I think you can tell though, if you have the copy of the book, you can tell like a really good example is the French page near the front. You can tell I've drawn, if it looks like it's from Darkest Dungeon or a comic book, I drew it. And then the background, if it's like a old style etching, it's public domain.
but the blend of the art styles is also helps sell the whole theme.
Well, yeah.
And
Actually, I mean, in comparison to Morkborg, like there's a lot of public domain in Morkborg, but like there is a lot more public domain from that time period in the public domain because it was further along in history and it's just more documented. So, like, if you want to find like high detail illustrations or etchings of any kind of tall ship, it's so easy to find. So it really helped, by kit bashing the two together, you really get this like Morkborg meets historical Age of Sail stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And if you are looking for maps or anything, go and follow Luke's Patreon
yeah, of course.
or
If
go to
you
the
need battle
website. So,
maps, yeah,
we'll cycle back around to that in a little bit. But
sure,
so we've discussed class slash archetypes, naval warfare in a pirating setting, the
yes,
setting itself, the Dark Caribbean, and things like that. Transferring all of that onto the character sheet, which I think again is another piece of stylized brilliance, is phenomenal. So, what was it like to take the Morkborg style? Is definitely there. The skull is very telling.
yeah.
But what was it like to sort of create the character sheet, the one-page character sheet, which I love, to be perfectly honest.
Sure. It's actually technically it's 2 in that it's designed for A5, so it's front and back. But if you print it at home, yeah, it's 1. It's a 1 letter or A4 size page. Well, I mean, the whole project, like, I think it's really clear that it is a Morkborg game. It says it's compatible on the cover. Literally, the cover is like a remix of the Morkborg cover. Like, I'm not trying to hide that it's a Morkborg game because it is. Like, I think if I had called it something different, maybe I would have done less of that. But like, it's important for me that people know that it's a Morkborg. I love Morkborg, and I got Pella wrote 2 of the monsters in there, and Johann's like art has basically changed my whole life. So like, I want to make sure that like people know it's a Morkborg game, and to that end, the character sheet is basically a redraw of the uh, Morkborg sheet, but I've extended it because on the Morkborg sheet it only has room for like the rules stuff, and that it has spots for your abilities and your equipment. But it doesn't have spots for all those other things that in Morkborg you can optionally roll for, which are like your I forget what they're called because I'm so used to the Pirate Borg ones now, but they're like, drawbacks that you might randomly acquire,
Yeah.
So for Pirate Borg, like, we didn't say those are optional. Obviously they are optional, but in my experience playing Morkborg, nobody doesn't roll on those tables because they're so fun, and all the generators roll on them. So because we didn't say they were optional, I wanted them to be on the sheet, and there was enough room on the sheet left after adding room for your background and your physical trademark and unfortunate incident, and that I was like, hey, this would be a great spot to put a spot for people to put their ship statistics in. And then, just take that whole concept that I just explained and put it through the lens of Chris Barassa and Darkest Dungeon and Mike Mignola, like that kind of inky, pooling blacks, sharp edges ink style, and keep the skeleton. Of course, there's a skeleton in the middle of the Morkborg sheet, but now it's like a bit, the ribs are its the spots where you write your modifiers, and the treasure chest is where you write how much silver you have. And yeah, I mean, it honestly just kind of like, it's one of those things that in hindsight, it feels like I didn't even do it, like it did itself, Like, oh, there
Yeah,
should be a parrot on there. And actually, Kevin, my friend who introduced me to Morkborg, he's the one that named Devil's Luck. I was like, I don't want to call this omens. I actually think that's confusing, that omens are a good thing, because you need. And he's like, why don't you call it Devil's Luck? And I was like, oh, that's perfect for a pirate game. And actually, to tangent with the rapscallion class, which has a big playing card motif on the spread, and you actually need a deck of cards for some of the abilities, and one of them is called Lucky Devil. And every time you spend your Devil's Luck, which for those not familiar is like kind of like inspiration in 5e on steroids, it's the like re-roll your dice or do max damage. Every time you spend your Devil's Luck as a rapscallion that has Lucky Devil, you draw from a deck of cards, and if it's high enough, you regain your luck. Well, if you draw a Joker, the devil can come, and if he comes, he might either give you all your luck back or you might die. So I think it was only appropriate to kind of lean into the pentagram, skull, blood dripping. I mean, all those things that like kind of get frowned upon in like religious Christian circles, unless it's in the lens of piracy. Then all of a sudden it's okay. Like skull and crossbones seems somehow friendly when it's related to a pirate, I guess. I don't know why.
Absolutely. No, ours is not a reason why in some respects. So
Yes, yeah.
We have mentioned how beautiful this book looks. We have mentioned sort of the contents within it. So if someone wants to, and you mentioned cons and things at one point, so if someone wants to come and find you and your team, as it were, at a con, where can we come and find you in the year of 2023?
Oh man, so many. Okay, well, I mean, obviously the biggest thing is the Patreon and our Discord. Now, you don't have to be a Patreon member to get into the Discord, of course, but we're always on there. And it seems like that community is ever steadily growing. Every time we get done with a con, we have a new set of GMs that have run games for us, or people who have got the book to come hang out. As far as what conventions we're going to be at this year, we've got Gen Con coming up. I'm not sure when this will air, but that Gen Con's at the beginning of August. That'll also be my 40th birthday, and we're having a Pirate Wizard Looks at 40 gathering at the Hyatt Regency lobby on Friday, if you guys are in the neighborhood. And so what else? We're doing Gen Con. We're doing Gamehole Con in Madison, Wisconsin in October. We're doing PAX Unplugged again in Philadelphia in December. And then we'll be back at Origins again next year. I'm also doing North Glen Pirate, what's it called? North Glen Pirate Fest, which is a like pirate cosplay event here in Denver. And I applied for a booth, and they were like, if you're not selling pirate things, you need to get permission from the leaders to do like a corporate sponsorship. And I was like, listen, like hold my grog. Like, you don't know anybody who does more pirate things. Like, it's like literally all we do is pirate stuff now. So so that'll be fun. And then I guess the real big thing that I want to mention is that Talk Like a Pirate Day, which is coming up September 19th, is the official retail release for Pirate Borg. And we're right now, really today, launching or like recruiting people, retailers and game masters. If you want to run in store, we're trying to make it like a big thing where people, kind of like DCC Day for Goodman Games, if you're familiar with that, where there'll be zines and stuff that retailers can pick up from us. Hopefully some swag that you can get out for participating, and then we're going to have like a tiered harbor master program, so that GMs who are running games, the more games they run, the more free swag they're available or they're eligible to get. Like we're going to try to do, obviously we already have t-shirts, but we're going to try to do maybe some like pieces of 8 D2 coins and stuff like that. That's hopefully just to kind of encourage, but more reward people who are running lots of Pirate Borg for the public, to get some pirate swag to show off. So that should be pretty exciting.
Amazing. And if you want to hear more, you've done a podcast of Ship of the Dead, which is a Pirate Borg themed actual play, if I'm not mistaken, that people can.
Actually, no, it's not an actual play. It's we mostly do interviews with other game designers so far. We're kind of in the middle of a transition. I've had a lot of designers on the show so far, but we're gonna be pivoting to like a more of a YouTube show that gets pushed to the podcast. Because I've just found that, like, while it's cool for me to talk to designers that I really look up to, people who are running Pirate Borg don't immediately benefit from that. And so we're going to be switching to like, here's how to. I'm actually kind of inspired by Kelsey from Shadow Dark. Like here's how to run this module. Like here, and this is really helpful for me whenever I buy a new module. Like I said, like I love to read, but I don't read that much, and my ADD gets the better of me sometimes, or I want to be drawing instead. So the idea will be that this podcast/YouTube content will be like, here's how to run Curse of Skeleton Point, the adventure that comes in Pirate Borg. And like, here's what to do in each location. Here's some tips. Like, here's how to run. Actually, we're about to drop a new video, I think tomorrow morning. Tyler just made a new like 15 very comprehensive video on how to run naval combat. So that'll be out tomorrow. I mean, so I think we're just trying to pivot a little bit away from what I wanted out of the podcast into a little bit more of like what will be helpful for people who are in the Pirate Borg sphere, in the Dark Caribbean, if you will.
Yeah,
and also, I guess one thing we haven't talked about is that this fall, I don't know if we're going to start it on Talk Like a Pirate Day or not, but we are going to be launching a like worldwide West Marches campaign. That's going to be a little bit more, for those not familiar, West Marches is like a style of play where the campaign world is like always moving forward and players can come and go and participate and change it as they want. And we're going to be doing like a very large scale West Marches. So I think it's going to be kind of like if you think of modern day MMORPGs like World of Warcraft or Destiny, where there are world events that unfold across the sea, across all play groups. But if you like kill the governor's daughter on session 1, that doesn't necessarily mean she'll be dead for everybody. I just don't think, when we have like published content with very important NPCs, if those are dead when you pick up the piece of content, that's kind of like anticlimactic. But the idea will be that this campaign can be run in public places, at cons, online. And then we're going to be using legendkeeper.com, which is a really great world building site, to track like all the world events. And like if your players go to an island that nobody's been to before, what do they find there? GMs will be able to drop pins. And then anybody playing in the campaign or anybody at all can go look at that world and check it out. So yeah, that's another way to come play Pirate Borg. Yeah.
That's amazing. And
so I guess just to finish up what I was saying with the podcast, I suspect that we'll have like regularly scheduled updates and new like, oh, here's what happened this month in the Dark Caribbean. We'll see.
It sounds like a lot of fun and a good way to keep not just GMs but gaming tables engaged and moving with the content and interacting with each other to learn and experience each other's games. Another way of doing it is virtual tabletops, which your game is being supported by, and you've gone for big hitters here: Alchemy Foundry and Roll20. So what's it been like to sort of take a pen and paper game and turn it into something accessible, not just to someone down the street, but someone across the world?
Well, I think that, you kind of don't really understand Limithron and to some extent Pirate Borg until you understand us through the VTT lens. Yes, you can play Pirate Borg without any of my maps. I usually do that when I'm playing in person. I mean, I do have a map book that I can show things if I need visual aids, but like you don't need to have miniatures to play Pirate Borg. It works great as a theater of the mind game. But people are busy and it's hard to find players, and like sometimes your friends are all over the country, or sometimes you just want to play with visual assets instead. So I feel like the real as intended Pirate Borg experience, I would say, is through one of the VTTs. Roll20 is obviously the most popular and most well known. It's also I'd say I don't want to say least complicated, but it's got a fairly low barrier to entry, and that you just give someone to log on a website and they go to this page and it makes sense. We're working on the Pirate Borg character sheet and content for that now. It'll be done soon, definitely by Talk Like a Pirate Day, but I'm hoping by the end of August. And then, of course, all my maps are available on Roll20's marketplace, obviously. Or you could upload them themselves if you were Patreon. You get the idea. Then there is Alchemy, which I think is like, I like describing Alchemy as it's kind of like the Mac to Foundry's PC in a way, in that you can't get under the hood, but the experience is a bit more tailored out the gate. And they just had a really successful Kickstarter that we were a part of. Pirate Borg is actually the only system available currently for Alchemy that's not 5th edition. Now, after the Kickstarter, they're going to be doing Call of Cthulhu and Core Morkborg and basically all of Free League's games. But I want to say that we were the first ones there because I love that program. I love those guys. Hi to Chris and Isaac if you're listening. It's a very visually minded VTT that's great for OSR style, theater of the mind style players. Those are two different categories, but for both combined, because it doesn't have the amount of crunch for navigating things. But it gives you what you need to really like immerse your brain into the VTT. Whereas like Roll20 looks a bit more like you're in a web browser. Alchemy, like it can be styled to look like for example, they're working on a system for Alien where it's going to look like the all the interfaces that you see in Alien. Like it's going to be great, So if you're playing a game where you don't need as many macros and stuff, Alchemy is incredible. And then there's Foundry, which it is the most feature rich of the platforms that we support. Every release, every map that I make for the Patreon gets a full Foundry conversion. So if you're at the Admiral level on Patreon, it'll come with built-in walls, lighting, sound effects. If it's a multi-leveled map, like a ship, it has multi-level token module built in. So if your players move their token onto the stairs, they can teleport to the next deck. So it's the most like a video game, which could be good or bad. I've actually found that for my own style of play, if I run in Foundry, I spend a lot of time prepping assets because I can. But if I run it in Alchemy, I don't because I can't. Like I don't add walls because you can't. I don't know if they're going to add feature for walls, but like I don't spend time on that. So I spend time on the things that are more important to the story, So it kind of depends what kind of experience you want. But I will say from a Limithron perspective, like we fully support both programs, but we make a lot of content ourselves for Pirate Borg for Foundry, including we have a free game system that is free to any Foundry user that you can install that supports naval combat. It supports the character sheet. It has a built-in random character generator. And then we have the premium module, which basically adds the whole book in there. So it makes character actors for every NPC and monster. It makes scenes for every map. It has all the roll tables configured as like single click roll tables. So it's like, if you're looking for the like VTT, I don't look at the book. I don't want to say video game experience, but modern VTT experience.
Yeah.
We as users of the program, we have built the experience from the ground up. That being said, I kind of feel like with this whole OSR thing, I'm like, I want to hold a book and roll real dice, Well, you don't need all the bells and whistles for that. So it's choose your own adventure.
Fair enough. And speaking of adventures, and you mentioned the Alien interface for Alchemy.
Yeah.
And you're wearing the baseball cap and
yes.
played it way back when. Have you had a chance to play the newer release?
So I have an interesting relationship with the new game. I have played it 3 times. I only own one Alien book, and you can imagine being published by Free League. I have had many opportunities over the past year and a half to acquire any number of Free League books because I see them often. Our booth is right next to theirs. I only have one book, and I just made this decision early on that I don't want to GM that game. I just kind of I kind of learned a lot from running Lord of the Rings, both The One Ring and Adventures in Middle Earth. And it's a little different with Alien, but with Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's stuff, I felt like it was like, I guess the best analogy I could come up with is like playing in the Bible, in that like, well, you can't kill that guy because he goes on to do, like I can't kill, Elrond. Not that I would kill Elrond, but like if I have a big important interaction with him before the War of the Ring, like that. That doesn't sit with me as a fan of
Mm,
Tolkien's work. So like, while I think that Ripley and Hicks and Hudson, these characters aren't like as important as Bilbo or Sauron, like they
mm,
still, like, it's just, I decided that it's a world that I don't really want to spend my time world building in and then running missions for people. Like, I just want to play it.
fair enough.
So it's ironic that like the IP that I'm like the biggest fanboy of, maybe aside from Tolkien, next to Tolkien, is the one that I have the least number of role playing games from. I mean, I have a bunch of other books. I have like the Aliens Technical Marine thing, and I have all the old Dark Horse graphic novels. But yeah, I love
Mm.
Alien. I just, I'm trying to keep that in a special place.
Yeah, no, of course. So, from the player perspective, then you said you've had a couple of games, allowing
Yeah.
yourself to be
Oh yeah.
immersed in the world, not necessarily tailor it in your own specific way and sort of
Yeah.
play with continuities and things. So, as a player, how has your experience
Oh
been
my god.
within?
I mean, I love that game. I not,
Mm,
like, I'd say no disrespect to Free League. I'm not a huge fan of just rolling d6s because I like polyhedral dice. Um, but that aside, like their use of the stress dice is like masterpiece game
mm,
design. Like when I'm playing Forbidden Lands, I like miss rolling a d20. But when I'm playing Alien, I'm like, yeah, this is perfect. I'm not looking for like a either remembered or like imagined fantasy role playing game experience that I imagine happened when I was a kid. You're like, oh, this is what D&D is like.
mm,
Which is what Forbidden Lands is and Dungeon Crawl Classics is to me. Like, this is the game I thought D&D was before I actually started playing it. Alien, like, I know what it is, and they can't change that because that's what it is. Like, when you're
mm,
playing Alien, you're playing Alien. So like the D6 stress mechanic dice is really, really well done. It actually makes things easier until they're not. Like when you're stressed, you actually get to roll. Have you played it?
yeah, I've played
Yeah.
it, run it, love it.
Yeah, it's like you get to roll more dice if you're stressed, but there's more likeliness that bad things will happen. And
Um,
I think it's a really, really well designed system, and but we use this game design term top down, meaning that the mechanics are suited to build. You see this a lot in CCGs where the mechanic is built to suit the theme of the card, not like, oh, we need a counterspell card. Now what do we call it? Like,
mm,
and I think Alien is a really, really good example of that kind of game design.
amazing, amazing.
Yeah, I
So,
actually. Oh, go ahead.
go on. No,
I was
please.
just gonna say, like, I don't know if I've said this publicly before, but like sometimes people ask me like what I'm gonna do next, and my answer is the Dark Caribbean. I'm like, what about after that? I was like, well, we're kind of going for a mothership kind of thing with this, where like we're making a whole line of product for pirate games, and I don't have any intent of stopping that. But if I did another project, like and if anybody from or I guess Disney now is listening, or if the guys at Free League who have the license are curious, like once they finish what they have planned for Alien, I think it'd be really, really fun to do a like shorter than like Morkborg length, Mork